Hi, it's Galfi and Galfette. Today, I'd like to invite you to explore VariAudio, a Cubase tool used mainly to modify and correct vocal parts. I'll tell you all about it right after the intro. Feel free to like this video if you find it interesting. You can also subscribe to our channel and activate the bell, which is always helpful for us. Here, I'm using a voice generated via Suno.ai and separated from the music. I'll tell you more about this method in a future video. To access VariAudio, simply double-click on an audio event to access the audio editor, and there, in the inspector, you have the VariAudio tab. If you open it and click on Edit VariAudio, you have access to a number of tools. VariAudio is generally intended for vocal work, although it can sometimes work with other instruments such as saxophone, for example. Once the event has been analyzed by Cubase, you can see the audio event divided into several segments. You can now move the notes to change their pitch or their position. You can see that each segment is crossed by a non-linear white line. It represents the real variations in the voice. The corresponding note on the keyboard here on the left is the dominant note of that segment. You can change the colors used with the palette on the right. If you don't see it, right-click in a blank area of the toolbar. If you right-click on an existing element, you'll get a contextual menu. Right-click on a blank area to select the components to be displayed in the toolbar. And here, you tick VariAudio segment colors. The palette options are as follows. Auto, segments belonging to the same voice have the same color. Event, displays the event color. If, for example, I change the color of this event, you can see that the color is modified in VariAudio. Pitch, the color depends on the pitch of the note. Scale and chords, color also depends on note pitch. Off-scale segments appear in orange, while on-scale segments are green. If you'd like to know more about color management in general in Cubase, there's a detailed video on the subject. You'll find the link in description. You'll notice that I've displayed both scale and chord here. I'm going to ask Cubase to use the chord track as a reference for scales, but you can also, if you prefer, define the scale of your choice here. Or follow Cubase suggestions. If you'd like to know more about the chord track, I've also made a video on the subject. And here you'll notice that some parts are in green and others in orange. Those in orange are outside the scale defined in the chord track. I can then choose to do a Ctrl+A to select all the notes, and use quantize pitches, which will modify the orange notes to include them in the selected scale. Here you can adjust the display of smart controls. These are the handles that appear when you hover over a segment. If you activate all smart controls, you'll see that there are more than the initial 4 handles. More on this later in the video. Just below, you'll find the pitch snap mode, which defines the precision of your movements. Absolute, moves in semitones. Relative, same thing, but keeping the original deviation in hundredths. These deviations are variations of the white line I mentioned earlier. Off, inactive, so you can move a segment freely. You can modify this pitch line via several parameters. Correct pitch in hundredths of a semitone, to bring it closer to what Cubase considers to be the dominant note. This will correct the offset here, for example. Straighten curve, which modifies the curve to bring it closer to straight lines, with fewer variations. At maximum, you may have an auto-tune effect. Shift formants, which are harmonic frequencies of the human voice. This can really change the voice.
Play the guitar in hand and a beat in my heart. Play the guitar in hand and a beat in my heart. Play the guitar in hand and a beat in my heart. Play the guitar in hand and a beat in my heart.
Finally, here you can modify the volume of the selected segment. The scale assistant here defaults to a C major scale. If you display the scale note guide, here, and change the scale, you'll see the alternating gray and dark gray bands in the background change according to the scale selected, with the gray bands representing the notes of the scale and the dark gray ones being out of range. Snap pitch editing means that when you move a note, you move it only within the limits of the chosen scale. You can then fine-tune each note with the horizontal smart controls to stretch or compress a note, or split a note to raise a part of it. As you can see, in this case, the surrounding notes modify themselves. Vertical smart controls, the top one acts on the amplitude of the pitch curve, just like the pitch correction I mentioned earlier in this video. The bottom one corrects variations within this note, like the straighten curve function. If you activate all smart controls, instead of the 4 you had before, you now have 11. These triangles here and there define the range over which the straighten curve function will operate. For example, if I drag my two triangles like this, the straighten curve parameter will only apply to the area between the two triangles. Here, you can modify the formants as we saw earlier, and you can see that my shift formant control also moves. And this control allows you to modify the volume. Here too, my control in the inspector moves as I move my mouse. Here and here, we have what we call the tilt. This will modify the curve as you can see. I'll give you a quick listen.
Play the guitar in hand and a beat in my heart. Play the guitar in hand and a beat in my heart.
Here, the tooltip tells you to press Alt to rotate. Here's how it works.
Play the guitar in hand and a beat in my heart. Play the guitar in hand and a beat in my heart.
Finally, this diamond-shaped button will determine the inflection point of the previous tilt controls. Here, it's centered, but if I move it here, you'll see that the right tilt has a much smaller area than the left tilt. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions. Have a good weekend and I'll see you next week with a new video.